For anybody that knows me, has kind of heard me over the years here, I'm a big fan of the curation that Aero Video has been doing over the years. And so this conversation has been a long time coming, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce Fran Simeoni, who's starting his new label, Radiance Films. Fran, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Yeah, no, this is truly a treat. I've been a huge fan of the work you've been doing over the last few years, and so I can't wait to see what you do here going forward. I definitely do want to talk about Radiance Films and some of the titles that I'm excited about just right out of the gate. But one of the things I noticed that maybe that'd be a good opportunity just to kind of get to know you a little bit here. I think one of the things that I've always been interested in is because, I the what I do know of you, although we're just getting to meet here, in person or in video for the first time, but is that you have very good taste, at least taste that aligns fairly well with my style. So in my sense, it's good taste. But the other thing that strikes me is this kind of encyclopedic knowledge of film, where you have the ability to go across geography and across, time period, and just sort of you have this really deep well of knowledge. So I'm curious. I always am interested in your background. Like, when did you kind of start getting into film?
I don't ever remember not being obsessive about films, really. I don't think I realized just how much of a film obsessive I was
Okay.
until probably quite late in life, because it was just something I did. It was not something I ever made a conscious effort about. It was always a place of comfort. So it was not sort of something that I studied or in outside of any academic sense. I didn't go away and sort of make a conscious effort to investigate various things. I just kind of followed my passion, and I think that's probably the way it always was, and to a great degree still is, really. It's my job now, but it is also a great passion as well. So it was always there, and my film education is probably not like most people's, because it became my job from a young age. I got my first job when I was 18, and
Wow, doing what?
By pure luck, it was a film company.
Nice.
I didn't think I was going to work in film at all. In that respect, I was probably really naive and quite sheltered in a way. I just sort of thought, oh, I'll get a kind of bog standard job that you kind of pick out of a line of really obvious jobs. I never really thought about all the jobs that could be out there and things that I could do. I just kind of went for the most banal thing, which is an accountant,
Okay.
because I always found numbers, fairly easy to get on with. So I kind of thought, that'll be okay, and it probably pays pretty well, blah blah blah. And so I went off to do that, but for a film company, which was just amazing luck, as I say. And I got there, and they ran cinemas. They were previously a distributor, so there was all this stuff everywhere. Previous VHS releases, posters, stills, transparencies, like all this amazing stuff that when I sort of saw it, I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And what do they do with this? And what was the purpose of this thing, and how did this work, and was it successful? Because the company had stopped being a distributor at that point. They ran cinemas, so there was all the new releases as well, but all the people who worked there, which was fairly atypical for the industry, were proper film fans. All into different things. We had like a guy who was into a lot of sci-fi and TV and stuff like that, and another guy who was really into 80s movies and horror. Someone else who was the main film guy, like the programmer, who was into just all manner of stuff, like surf movies and new wave movies, and had an immense knowledge of all kinds of cinema, classic studio era stuff. So I was surrounded by all this sort of amazing knowledge, and quickly realized I didn't want to be an accountant anymore. So I sort of tried to figure out what I wanted to do, and then went to university as a mature student. So I started studying university when I was 21 and studied a film degree. I was always interested in the practical side of filmmaking, and thought maybe I would make films, and thought, wrote a few scripts and stuff, and that went okay. I got some good feedback, but ultimately I never got it together. But I was studying theoretical film rather than practical film. So I was exposed at that point to an even greater
Mm,
what's the word, landscape of film. So at that point, my work education, if you like, I'd been exposed to sort of newer world cinema, and more of the classics, and doing my own digging. But university introduced me to different modes of documentary filmmaking, to third cinema, to all sorts, really. I mean, I'm sort of trying to remember it all now. It's quite a while ago.
no.
But that was amazing. I was massively inspired by that, particularly all the third cinema stuff. I really like Latin American cinema, and all the stuff that was going on there. And that was, really, I mean, I didn't love all of it. I mean, I remember watching Usman Sembini's Yedo, which is a bit of a tough watch,
Yeah.
but it was really interesting. And I loved the discovery aspect of it. So
Mm.
I've always been really interested in that, even in my private life. I mean, I remember sort of being able to see Yoshida's films, sort of whatever it was, 15 years ago, and got the confidence, I suppose, which is a lot of it, of why we do these things. It is about confidence, to do them at Arrow. And,
Hmm.
it's a great thrill to be able to present those to a wider audience. And there's all sorts of stuff like that. It's things you sort of go digging around, and then you're able to sort of work on them in a professional capacity, which is really gratifying and exciting. So
Yeah.
yeah, that educational part of my life, through those different things, through work and university, and now this job, um, has made my approach to film, I suppose, a bit different to most people's, because of where and who I've learned from, and the professional sort of access that I have now, being able to sort of get films from producers, and being able to watch things that are incredibly rare. So I guess that in a way contributes to that kind of variety that you mentioned earlier. But I think that kind of sense of discovery was always there, really.
That's what's kind of coming through, at least in the titles that you're putting out, starting in January. But I guess I'm curious now. So what does that look like for, 5, 10-year-old Fran? Like, were you always into art house cinema? Did you have kind of like just watching whatever was in the theaters, or?
No, not at all. I mean, as I said earlier, I was like quite sheltered in a way, um, just from certain things, just because I think I just didn't have access.
Yeah,
The
okay.
internet wasn't a thing. Um, Being able to find certain things, I just didn't have that kind of inclination at that young age to go and find books. And to be honest, most of my learning comes from books.
Okay.
When you sort of say, well, where did you find this film? It's like, I probably read about it, whether it's in a book or a magazine or something. But as
Your
a
books have a lot of like scribbled notes on the side and like circles and stuff.
no, I kind of make lists elsewhere. I'm a bit of a
Okay.
spreadsheet person,
Nice.
so I kind of make lists like that more so. Um, but as a young child, and even as a teen, I was just much more about sort of Scorsese and crime films, and Hollywood, really. I mean, I was saying to someone the other day, I don't remember the first foreign language film I saw, because foreign language was never a big moment for me, because being from an Italian family, we always had Italian TV on. So
Okay.
the idea of watching films in another language wasn't too alien already. And we watched stuff on Italian TV. Like, I remember watching um, Bud Spencer's TV show, whatever that was called, um, and maybe the odd film here and there.
Uh-huh.
I remember seeing a bit of a Fellini film when I was really, really young, and just sort of, it wasn't for me. I didn't watch it. It was
Yeah, yeah.
Amarcord, which is
Oh, nice.
not one of my favorites, but an interesting film. But seeing it as like a 10-year-old, I remember just sort of watching it, thinking, "What is this? This is something to pay a bit of attention to." But ultimately,
Right.
got a bit bored and turned it over.
Right.
So I don't know what my first foreign language film was, but it wasn't like I was a precocious child watching Bresson at 13 years old. That all came later. So
Yeah.
I think that was, and maybe this is just a natural interest in lists, or maybe the excitement of lists produce more lists, but probably, just discovering the IMDb top 250, the AFI top 100, the Sight and Sound 100
Right.
best films, and sort of going through all various lists like that. And then, you find yourself in various different rabbit holes, whether it's, discovering Kurosawa for the first time, or Antonioni, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You see these films at the top of the list, and that's the way I naturally went. So because those lists are very sort of canon based, my exposure to genre films, and my experience of that was pretty low when I got to Arrow. I mean, I started Arrow when I was 26, and at that point, it was all really new to me. I mean, I'd seen a few Argentos. I'd seen like Suspiria and Tenebrae.
Hmm.
I'd seen all the Romeros, but I mean, it was all pretty top tier stuff.
Yeah.
The sort of more obscure things that hadn't sort of permeated the culture as much were all new to me. So I'd never seen a Fulci film before starting at Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was really completely unknown to me, really. So when I started Arrow, I did sort of feel like a bit of an outsider, really. Um, and to a certain extent, I sort of was made to feel that way a little bit. But it was the job I was tasked with, so I kind of got on with it. The first thing I did was I sort of realized, my taste aside, and it was never about me, and I always kind of had that view at Arrow, because it was always a team effort, and the team was continually growing, and the tastes and experience of the team very much influenced the label.
Sure.
But even then, when it was just me and the CEO, who much like me wasn't a huge, knowledge base for these kinds of cult and genre films. Even then, I sort of said, well, look, it can't just be horror, because once you've done all the horrors that you can get, and at that time it wasn't so much a thing to be licensing, big movies from studios. You're going to be releasing a load of crap,
Uh-huh.
because there are lots of good horror films, but it's not an endless well.
Sure.
You don't want to be scraping the bottom after a while. And I said, if people like Romero, they're going to like other things. They're going to like Brian De Palma, or they're going to like blaxploitation movies, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it may be. And Battle Royale was coming down the pike, and I sort of said, well, there are obvious offshoots from all these things, so that allowed me to use more of what I knew. So with Battle Royale, which I was already a fan of, I already sort of started thinking, well, let's go from there to Battles Without Honor and Humanity. That would be amazing. So there were all different things like that, and it was really interesting, because that enabled me to get a much more experience in cult films and genre films. And
Yeah.
because it's your job and you kind of live it every day, you do kind of start to wonder where your own passions end and your job begins. And
I mean,
that was
that's
something I
nice.
sort of that's something I
No, no, no.
constantly wrestled with,
Yeah.
in understanding where the line is.
It's nice, you know, well, that last point is really interesting. I want to dig into that. There's one thing you said earlier that I just want to kind of talk about a little bit first, because um, that I had a similar experience, although it was on a smaller scale. I went to go work. I just could have liked movies and whatever. I didn't, I would have said Shawshank Redemption was the best movie ever made for a long time, up until I was, 18. And it's a fine movie. But then I went to go work in a video store, Blockbuster Video at the time. It was around 2000, 2001. And it just so happened that Blockbuster video, I was the only person that wasn't a film major.
Mm.
And this particular Blockbuster had a trauma film section. And it was probably one of the only ones in the country because it was a franchise store, so they got to play around a little bit with what they had. And so, I discovered Asian cinema at that time, just Asian cinema. Then I got deeper, but trauma films. I discovered all this stuff through them. And you talk
Mm.
about that film school experience for you of just being surrounded by people that knew more, and you can't help but kind of get caught up in the excitement, right? Because as they're talking about, you know, um, Lloyd Kaufman, I had to go figure out who this was, and like I had to, go watch the Poultrygeist.
Yeah,
So I can hang in the conversation.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
I think it's so critical in like the formative years to have that kind of almost like a community of people that where it's not just you making lists, but it's like you're getting that excitement around certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for film fans, there's nothing more pleasurable to be involved in conversations like that.
Yeah,
It is a bit difficult to replicate that online because it's not so much a conversation, it's just sort of reading various different posts, and people can, essentially write up mini reviews. It's not so much a conversation, so it's difficult to kind of capture the the kind of special quality that can bring, I think. But yeah, that is an amazing way to be exposed to different films, and it's difficult. That's what makes my job hard because when you're doing films that aren't immediately obvious, it is difficult to get people to buy into them if they don't have conversations like that. So
yeah,
I am quite dependent on people, being adventurous and enjoying the sense of discovery for what it is, rather than, I suppose, but being a bit more cynical, as is natural, I think, because it's money at the end of the day.
sure.
Blu-rays aren't cheap to buy, so I totally get that people might be cautious, or you know have a bit of buyer's remorse occasionally. I understand that, but I think certainly with Radiance, I want to do a good mix because my tastes aren't, as is probably obvious, aren't narrow. A lot of people sort of said to me, "Oh, you're focused on such a wide set of films," and that's kind of played in my mind a bit. I sort of look back and think, well, what are the other labels doing that makes me seem a lot wider? And I never wanted to be just an Asian film label or just an Italian film label. I mean,
Sure.
that just doesn't sort of seem right to me. It's sort of like, well, I know there's loads of other great films from these other areas, so why would I not do those?
Well, that's actually a strength. I see it as a strength, and I want to get in there. I just have to say very quickly, it's funny that of all the things you called out Battles Without Honor and Humanity, because that's film specifically. I saw that there was a Asian film festival in Dallas, 2000, I don't know, 2002, 2003, somewhere in that range, where I was going to university, and they showed that the first one. Um, and I just remember sitting back, and I'd had some exposure to Asian films at that point. I was getting a little bit into Takashi Miike already, and just there was a little bit of exposure. But I remember just sitting back and thinking, like, that's a really cool way to do a crime film. Like, this
Mm.
is amazing. And so, that just happened to be a very seminal film for me. And so that was actually one of the main reasons I kind of went through a period where I stopped collecting just from because of work, trying to get stuff off the ground and getting a family and all these different things. I took about a 10-year break. I got back into collecting around 2018, 2019. And then there was this company that was around that had only been kind of in its infancy when I stopped, called Arrow. And I found I found them because of Battles Without Honor and Humanity. And then I started digging around and I was like, I like this. This company is awesome. So anyways, just of all the ones you called out, that was the way that I found you inadvertently. Um, but there's one, I think what I like about just going back to your comment about being diverse, there's connective tissue and in the experience of watching different kinds of movies, right? And I don't know, I'd have to see some of these films to try to find that for you specifically. But if you have the ability to put out Red Sun, for example, you do it. right? Because like that's a film that's lost, relatively lost, and like needs to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the interesting part of it. The connective tissue is a really good way of putting it, because once you get one thing, and the extras I think will help with this, and that's what's exciting about doing these releases, is that you do get to explore, um, and that can be wider. You can get into that film and then go, oh, okay, well, this is this whole other side of the new German cinema I didn't really realize, and
Yeah,
and and,
exactly.
and Red Sun will go into that, and that's what's really exciting. And then potentially there's other films that you go, oh, okay, well, this is sort of similar, it's from a similar era, or maybe it's by the same filmmaker, or whatever it is, and then you lead into this whole other um, area of film, and I think that's really exciting. And it's a shame in a way that the industry is kind of built on essentially algorithms, really. I mean, it's not always exactly algorithms, but it's basically the same principle, in that, okay, audiences liked this one film by this one director, so we'll do five more. And
Right. Uh-huh.
unfortunately, that's not always a good thing, because maybe that director didn't have five other good films, maybe they only had three. And it just does become this kind of regurgitation for the labels to be able to sort of do that. And maybe it's just because that's what's realistic for the market, rather than the label sort of being bad. That's not what I'm saying. That's just sometimes the realities of the market. And it's not like this is all down to the labels either. It's easy to just say the label because they're the one that releases it, but it's very much down to the studios as well. They're the ones who sort of create their sales lists around these kinds of things, or these kind of very obvious ways to market or sell films. And it's not uncommon for a label to go to a company and sort of say, what do you know about this film, and for them to sort of say nothing, basically.
Oh, interesting.
um, but they do own that film, and maybe they've got some materials for it, but they don't even realize, or it got left off a list, or some paperwork needs to be checked, and that can withhold certain films. Or there's films I've recently discovered in preparing for Radiance that have absolutely blown me away, but there's nothing written about them, or the licensors don't really know much about them, or there's not the material, or they're just not an active conversation. And it's that's all those difficulties then combined to sort of frustrate releases, when people sort of say, oh, have you ever thought about this? And it's like, yeah. I'd love to do that, but unfortunately it's just me and you talking about it. So
Right, right,
um
right.
yeah, it's a mixture of sort of emotions, the whole sort of journey that you go on, from sort of that first discovery of film, as we're talking about, loving it and wanting to share it, but then from a business point of view, having these challenges.
Well, going a level deeper is something that I've always been fascinated by, and I think one of the ones that jumps out to me is the Casa Nostra set that you're putting out.
Mm.
The idea of being able to go a level deeper into Franco Nero and see him outside of Django and kind of see him in this new light, because he was an extremely prolific actor, actually. And I think most people kind of view him in one way as far as the Westerns. Maybe that's like the first thing that comes to mind. So I can't wait for these films to come out. Did you, or were those all through the same rights holder?
No, they weren't.
Okay.
I was going to say most of my box sets up, but it's probably a mixture. I mean, some of the box sets are like, my big thing with box sets is putting together something that is really satisfying to watch as a collection, rather than, you do kind of get just director collections, which I've done plenty of at Arrow, and they were good. Um, but there's always a little bit of a frustration with them, because it's kind of like, this film doesn't really fit, or wouldn't it be good if it was just these and this other one? Or so
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to do with Radiance. And there are a few box sets that I've got planned, some director collections, some sort of theme collections. It's a real nice mixture, but what I like about all the box sets so far is that for me at least, is that they're pretty perfect. I mean,
Hmm.
Cosa Nostra has not got anything in it that I would take away. the only thing with that is that I would add Confessions of a Police Captain, which is another Franco Nero mafia influenced or mafia based story, which was directed by Damiani, but we can't find the rights, unfortunately. So, but all the box sets are curated in that way, and I'm really enjoying putting them together. But to that one, yeah, I mean, Franco Nero's got a lot more to offer than Django, which personally I think is an okay film. It's a great sort of easy film to sort of say, this is a good example of the spaghetti western. But I think Franco Nero did better work, in my opinion. I mean, the first two films in the set, I think, are really, really, really strong films. But Franco Nero in particular, with the second film, The Case is Closed, one of his best performances, I think. He's really, really good in it. And it might be a bit of a discovery for people because I think in these films you see he's actually a really good actor. And I think in some other films maybe that have been released, it's kind of, he's sort of maybe playing more his own sort of type, if you like. With these, he's sort of, they're more serious. So there's another dimension to his performances, I think, which is really interesting. So yeah, it's great to be able to dig into things like that and show other sides of directors or actors or eras even, which is fun.
Well, so speaking of that, one of the biggest surprises to me on Blu-ray so far is that, just as a whole, is that Todd Solondz doesn't have more stuff coming out. And so maybe it's just my age, but I grew up when he was kind of in his prime. So when I was getting into film, I was watching his movies in the theater. And Welcome to Dollhouse certainly has its rougher elements, but it's not quite as hard as some of his films to watch. But it's such a amazing movie. And were you surprised that was available, or was that one of the things that early on you knew, like, okay, if I have my label, like Todd Solondz is getting some love?
No, not really. So I wasn't familiar with Welcome to the Dollhouse before starting Radiance. I'd seen his later films and enjoyed that. Well, enjoyed, I don't know if that's the right word, but I thought they were very good. Yeah. I mean, I think he's a great filmmaker, in terms of what he does. But I never sort of thought, what people want to own and probably watch a few times and really dig into is happiness or palindromes.
Exactly.
But I know those films. I thought they were very good. So when Welcome to the Dollhouse came along, I was like, oh, okay, let's see what it's like, And I loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So I thought, yeah, definitely, this, because I love that era of filmmaking, 90s, Sundance, independent. To me, it's a kind of mirror of the 70s, really. In a slightly different way. It wasn't studio based; it was independent. But you had directors with these great vision, and you had really, which I love, idiosyncratic filmmaking. That's a great example of it. But once I was doing the release and the reaction hit to it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Even I became convinced that we need happiness and palindromes and storytelling. All these films on Blu-ray that aren't available yet. And it is just that kind of different thing between when you're inside it doing it and your perspective of what people want versus being a fan and a customer. And sometimes it is difficult when you're working the job to kind of have that perspective, to keep the kind of the punter's mindset. But yeah, then I was sort of starting with Welcome to Dollhouse. I thought, yeah, I want that Todd Solondz section on my shelf. Maybe I won't watch Happiness over and over again, but I do want it on the shelf. It's a great film.
To me, he's very much like Gaspar Noé in the sense that it's not what the story is about, but it's the way that he approaches the story that's just kind of jarring, and it forces you to talk about it. Like, you can't help but engage in or go, I guess if you're online, go read reviews. You can't help but engage the film in some way. because you watch his movies and you're just like, what was that? And then it forces you to think about it, which is one of my favorite things that a movie can do. Is after you done, you don't really just go to the next one. You just kind of you're just thinking about it a little bit. You're like, what did I just see?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a funny one really, because it's difficult to sort of definitively say this kind of film sells really well, because there are many examples where that will never hold up. So, when you come to Todd Solondz or to Gaspar Noé, you can't say, oh, feel bad films or films which are challenging to watch are going to sell well if they're of a certain quality, because
Sure,
there'll be ones that just don't.
sure.
Um, and there are films which are maybe less good but are a great fun time that people will say, yeah, I know it's not brilliant, but it's good to stick on an evening of after a long day or whatever, and I have a good time with it. But there'll
Yeah,
be examples where that doesn't work either. So when you're sort of approaching something, you think, oh, this is like, there is a film that I've got which is a feel bad movie, and you come away and you just feel drained. But after I thought about it, it was a similar kind of thing where I just sort of thought, but it's really, really good, and it just deserves to be out there. And I just basically said, I don't care. I'm just going to do it.
awesome.
I'm doing that quite a lot, which is a bit dangerous. So I hope I'm getting more things right than wrong. But it comes back to that sort of mindset I mentioned about being more of a punter, and that's the way I'm approaching the label. It's kind of like, well, if I bought this Blu-ray, what would I want?
Yeah.
And I'm doing that much more than not really. I mean, the approach previously was sort of, and became stricter and stricter at Arrow. I mean, that was part of the reason why I wanted to move on. I wanted to be much more nimble, um, much more from the gut, rather than let's analyze this and let's look at sales and let's do a budget and let's
Uh-huh.
work to these specific
Uh-huh.
things that we have to do, whether it's like the spend or the package or the whatever, all those different things. So now I'm just kind of like, yeah, chuck another essay in. Oh yeah, this didn't get touched on. Let's just make a new extra. I'm just doing that for all the releases, not really monitoring anything at all. Um,
The chartered accountants in the world are cringing at that statement.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
You've
Well,
gone to the other side.
fortunately, I haven't got anyone breathing down my neck on it, in that regard. So it's amazing for me to have that kind of liberation
Yeah.
to to um to not play by the rules really. I mean, even when I started, there was this thing about like, well, you can't have booklets that are more than sort of 40-ish pages. And when I was planning, I was like, I've just got booklets in here that are 70 pages long. And I just went back to the people who kind of look after these things and said, look, let's figure this out.
That's
So
awesome.
in The Working Class Goes to Heaven, it's a 52-page booklet. And
Great.
I got in everything I wanted to get in with no, it's a 56-page booklet. With A Woman Kills, it's a 52-page booklet, because I just go from the perspective that these are all the things I want. Let's do that, and then anything that just can't be done, we'll figure out a way around it, or we'll change it. So
Yeah.
it is all sort of like uncompromising at the moment, which is feels good.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad that we get to be a part of your midlife crisis and track along with you, because it's funny you speak specifically about Working Class Goes to Heaven. I literally have that on my screen. That's the one I was going to call out next, because we talked about Todd Solondz, and not that Elio Petri, I would never put them in the same sentence, but this idea that people may only know Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion or something, right? And now there's this cool opportunity to go, no, 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 he's a excellent filmmaker overall. Check
Yeah,
this out. So I can't wait. I've actually never seen that movie, but I can't wait to watch it. That's a March, is that right? Or is that a February?
January.
Oh, even better. Yes,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah,
It's one of the first ones then. So yeah, I can't wait to dive into that. Um,
yeah. Petri is, I think, a great filmmaker. I mean, he's one of a few filmmakers I discovered a long, long time ago, along with like Francesco Rosi and Pontecorvo and Mazzelli and all these kinds of Italian filmmakers, Bellocchio, who were making these films in the sort of 60s, 70s, and later even, who were outside of that kind of Antonioni and Fellini kind of pillar of sort of quality, and they made sort of much more individual films, and the influences, particularly with Working Class Goes to Heaven, are really fascinating, and it's a film I think it will take people by surprise, because although it kind of almost looks like on the face of it like a Ken Loach film or something, it's kind of like gritty, and it's set in a factory and it's about workers' rights, but it's a really striking film, and the way it's shot is absolutely stunning. But also it's like bombastic as well, and it's like the humor of it, and Volante's performance is wild, and the lineage of the film goes back to Italian comedies, which is really fascinating to read. I mean, I didn't even make that connection watching the film, and when that was sort of mentioned by the guys doing the booklets, or one of them, I can't remember which one it is. I was like, oh God, yeah, that's just so interesting, because the Italian comedy is something I've become a fan of. I was sort of thinking about Radiance, like I'd seen Big Deal on Madonna Street, maybe one other, and I've dug into that genre a lot over the last year or so. And prior, actually, I tried to do it at Arrow, but it didn't really work. No one was interested. So I'm doing it at Radiance. And the Italian sort of comedy boom, the Commedia all'Italiana, as it was called, is fascinating, and the films are really good. So then to track that connection from Working Class wasn't intentional at all, but it's another rabbit hole, I think, that we were talking about earlier. So you find this thing and it's like, oh, okay, well, how does this connect? And oh, okay, are those films a lot darker than Big Deal on Madonna Street, which is the first one, suggests? And it's like, yes, they absolutely are, and much more serious as well, really. With the issues they talked about. So that's a whole other exciting thing to get into at some point. But yeah, no, it's awesome.
I could easily go for another 45 minutes. I can't believe how fast this time flew by. I just have to ask, when I saw that you brought in Kat to help with Radiance in some capacity, I was very excited, because you talk about this idea of a community coming together, and her life is out there for everybody to hear. She's done so many commentaries at this point. She's such a well-known voice in film, and so I'm excited. I hope I'm assuming that y'all are, as Radiance continues on, y'all are both kind of curating together and just kind of kind of egging each other on and pushing each other. Is that kind of how that goes?
Yeah, I think it will be a while before that kind of materializes, because most of the early stuff is sort of more me, but there is one film that I kind of practically bought for Kat to work on. So she's having a great time getting her teeth into that. There's other films which we have shared passion for, which we're both really excited about, that we're going to work on. And then there's other things that we've both been discovering at the same time through this work. There's a film, unfortunately, which I can't seem to get because the rights holder is a bit of a nightmare and it's not restored, that we sort of discovered whilst looking and talking about the kinds of films and filmmakers that we wanted to work on. So yeah, I fully expect that there will be those kinds of things coming up. And with Tom Mayers as well, who is really involved in the same capacity, and likewise, films that we're discovering or films that I'm suggesting to him are like, yeah, this is really good, let's do that. And Alexandra Helen Nicholas was involved a little bit. She had to step back for personal reasons. But there are films coming up where she previously recommended it and I've been able to get it, and we're working together in a sort of smaller capacity, or other films that I'm discovering and I'm kind of like, oh man, who's written about this? And she has. So it's quite sort of interesting that these things sort of go around this way. But yeah, it's good to kind of have their input and for us to work collaboratively. I do like working with people a lot, so
yeah,
I'm always up for that kind of collaboration.
Well, I'm one of these, I forget exactly what you called it, but the ones that gets a 3 years worth of Radiance films just sent to me. So I can't wait to see what you do. I trust your curation game. And so I'm very happy that you're doing this. And thank you for kind of being bold and putting your voice out there in the world and saying, no, I want to make something that's kind of my own. Because I think you'll find, if you haven't already seen this, but a lot of people share your taste, and so I think it's going to be a wildly successful journey for you. And I'm very happy to be speaking with you, sort of before it officially kicks off, even though I know you've been working on it for a while.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, the aim for me really is just to release more and more films. So the more I'm able to do that, the happier I'll be.
Just quick fire, like 3 questions that are just like, 1 sentence answers. Are there going to be standards after the numbered sell out, or is that a case by case?
It's case by case. I mean, I think some
Okay.
things won't have standards. They just probably have their space in the market in the limited edition, and that's it. They're
Okay.
going to disappear. There is something I'm working on that I think might just be more upfront with that, to sort of say, look, this is a one shot and that's it.
Okay.
But
Um,
it's down to the title.
Sure. No, yeah, like you said, certain ones, they just don't have an unlimited capacity to sell, right? It's nice if it's 2,000 or 3,000. Spine number, right? You're doing a spine number system.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the best way to buy to where more money goes into Fran's pocket to be able to invest into more films is through radiancefilms.co.uk.
Yes, it is. I would love to have a US website at some point, but it's not something I can take on right now.
Yeah,
The
that's okay.
alternative to that is buying from the MVD website or
That's
like
right.
Diabolic or something like that.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Grazie. And I hope, after another 12 months, 18 months, once you're kicking up and running, love to have you back on and just kind of see how it's been for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, Fran, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.